Warning: what you are about to discover is not for the faint of heart. For centuries, historians have hidden, censored, or simply remained silent about some of the most brutal practices of the Mongol Empire. Torture so atrocious that not even the chronicles of their enemies dare to fully describe them. Today, in this video, we are going to break that silence. You will learn about the most inhuman and ruthless methods of punishment that the Mongols secretly used to terrorize and subjugate entire peoples. From public dismemberments to psychological punishments that drove victims to madness, including death rituals so cruel that they were passed down only by word of mouth, like forbidden legends. And pay attention. At the end of this video, I will reveal the most cruel and disturbing torture of all, a practice so inhuman that even the Mongols themselves kept it secret. But first, leave me a comment. What do you think was the most terrible punishment the Mongols applied? Do you believe these methods were a legitimate form of control or absolute barbarity? Your opinion is very important, and as always, I'll read it carefully. And if you're passionate about the dark tales of history, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Because here, at Dark Medieval Tales, we always explore what others prefer to keep silent. Death by compression, the silent Mongol torment. Imagine for a moment being immobilized, your body trapped between heavy wooden boards, feeling how, inch by inch, the pressure slowly crushes your bones, breaks your ribs, collapses your lungs, all while you're still conscious. This was one of the most terrifying methods of torture and execution that the Mongol Empire secretly employed. Death by compression. Unlike other, more bloody forms of punishment, this technique was characterized by its brutal slowness and the victim's silence, not due to a lack of pain, but because of progressive asphyxiation and shock prevented even a scream. How did it work? The Mongol executioners would place the prisoner on the ground, completely immobilized. Then, on their chest and abdomen, they would place heavy boards or large stones. But the most disturbing part was the procedure. It wasn't about crushing them all at once, but gradually adding more weight, while the bones cracked and the internal organs began to fail. The suffering could last for hours or even days. First, the victim lost the ability to breathe normally, then felt the ribs break, the lungs collapse, and finally, an agonizing death through internal asphyxiation or multiple organ failure. All of this happened without spilling a single drop of blood, which, according to some sources, aligned with certain spiritual beliefs of the Mongols, who avoided staining the ground with the blood of some worthy enemies or high-value prisoners, a punishment reserved for traitors and important enemies. Death by compression was not an ordinary punishment. It was especially applied to those whom the Empire wanted to make suffer to the very last breath, as a warning to others. It is said that several rival tribal leaders were executed in this way, not just to eliminate them physically, but to completely demoralize their followers. Moreover, the silent nature of this torture made it easier to carry out in secret, away from the curious eyes of other peoples, feeding the dark legend that the Mongols practiced punishments so terrible that no one dared to describe them. Can you imagine a worse death than this? Let me know in the comments. Do you think this method is more cruel than a quick execution? Is it more humane to avoid blood, or even more macabre to prolong the suffering like this? Stay with us until the end, because we still have to reveal the most inhuman torture of all, the one that even the Mongols themselves chose never to record. The slow arrow's punishment, an agony that tore the soul apart. Imagine being tied up, unable to move, while a slow and merciless rain of arrows pierces your body, one after another, never granting you a quick death. This was one of the cruelest and most sadistic punishments of the Mongol Empire, designed to prolong suffering to maximum and turn death into a true physical and psychological torment. Unlike a swift execution, this punishment wasn't meant to quickly eliminate the enemy, but rather to create a spectacle of horror and despair that would serve as a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the power of the Mongols. How was this punishment carried out? The prisoner was tightly bound, often in a public place, so that all could witness the terrible fate of rebels or traitors. The Mongol archers, expert and lethal, would shoot arrows with terrifying precision, but in a very particular way. The arrows were not aimed at the heart or vital organs, but at less lethal parts, arms, legs, thighs, to avoid an immediate death. Each arrow pierced flesh and muscle, tearing skin, veins, and nerves. The pain was unbearable, but the victim remained conscious, suffering in endless agony as their blood slowly stained the earth. This punishment could last for hours and, in some accounts, even days, depending on the condemned person's endurance and the executioner's cruelty. The devastating psychological effect. Beyond the extreme physical pain, the slow arrow's punishment generated overwhelming psychological terror. The victim not only faced death, but the certainty that their agony would be prolonged as they watched their muscles and skin being pierced again and again. It was a process of total dehumanization. The body turned into a battlefield. Each arrow a reminder of the Mongols' absolute power. Did you know this torture had a strategic purpose? By punishing in this way, the Mongols sent a brutal and clear message. There would be no mercy for rebels, and resistance would be paid with the most horrifying of deaths. The victims also became living warnings to the conquered populations, sowing fear and ensuring near total obedience. Could you endure such a death? Let me know your opinion in the comments. What would you do if you witnessed such an execution? Do you think terror was more effective than brute force in controlling an empire? Dismemberment by horses, the most cruel and terrifying execution of the Mongol Empire. Imagine being completely helpless, each of your limbs firmly tied to a different horse. The horses, restless and tense, prepare to run in opposite directions. You feel the unbearable pressure, your body stretching, and then the brutal tearing of muscles, tendons, and bones. This is not a fictional story, but one of the most atrocious methods of torture and execution that the Mongol Empire used to punish its enemies. Dismemberment by horses. How was this execution carried out? The condemned, almost always a political enemy, a rebellious leader, or someone guilty of treason, was tied in a horizontal position, with wrists and ankles bound to 4 separate horses. Then, the executioners released the horses, which instinctively pulled in opposite directions. At first, the tension was unbearable, as the prisoner's body stretched like a piece of cloth between opposing forces. Then, slowly, the muscles began to tear. The tendons, which held the limbs together, gave way to the brutal force. Finally, the bones fractured with a dry, terrifying sound, and the flesh was ripped apart as the body was dismembered in an unending agony. This process could last minutes, or even hours, depending on the prisoner's resistance and the strength of the horses. A macabre spectacle with a terrifying purpose. This execution was not just a form of punishment, but a public spectacle intended to terrify and send a brutal message to anyone who dared to challenge Mongol power. The conquered peoples were often forced to witness these atrocities, to understand that rebellion would not only be crushed but punished with unimaginable horror. Dismemberment by horses served to dehumanize the enemy, reducing them to a symbol of extreme and absolute punishment. The cultural and military background of this practice. The Mongol Empire, known for its fierce military discipline and strategic brutality, used terror as one of its most effective weapons. Beyond combat and battles, psychological control over conquered peoples was fundamental, showing the fate that awaited rebels maintained peace through fear. Furthermore, some accounts suggest that this execution was reserved for especially dangerous enemies or traitors who had broken the trust of Mongol leaders, serving as an exemplary punishment to prevent future betrayals. The physical and psychological suffering. The physical pain was unbearable and prolonged, but perhaps even more devastating was the psychological impact. The certainty of a slow, excruciating, and public death. The agony of feeling every fiber of the body slowly tearing apart. The helplessness in the face of imminent death, and the public humiliation constituted total torture, beyond just the physical realm. What would you think if you were a witness or victim of this execution? I invite you to reflect and share your opinion. Do you think the brutality of this method was necessary to maintain such a vast empire? Or do you consider it an act of pure barbarity, with no justification? A final warning. The history of dismemberment by horses is not just a display of extreme cruelty, but a reminder of the power of fear as a tool for control and domination. And although today we are horrified by it, at that time, this torture marked the difference between the survival and fall of entire empires. Don't miss the end of the video, where we will reveal the most cruel and forbidden torture of all, the one that even the Mongols themselves didn't want us to know about. The punishment of suffocating smoke, the silent and deadly torture of the Mongol Empire. Imagine being locked inside a small enclosed space with no possibility of escape, while slowly the air you breathe fills with thick, dark, poisonous smoke. You can't scream, you can't run, you can only wait as the oxygen disappears and the poison invades your lungs. This was one of the most cruel and secret punishments of the Mongol Empire, designed to end the lives of dangerous prisoners without causing visible bloodshed or a public spectacle. How was this punishment carried out? Mongol executioners would confine the condemned inside small chambers, often underground or sealed airtight. Then, in an adjacent space, they would ignite fires using toxic or highly irritating materials, producing thick smoke that slowly invaded the chamber where the victim was trapped. The smoke filled every corner, making breathing difficult, burning the respiratory tract, and causing a slow and painful suffocation, a slow and terrifying agony. Unlike violent executions, this punishment was a prolonged torment. The victim would feel the oxygen depleting, breathing becoming increasingly difficult, the throat burning, and the mind starting to lose clarity as hypoxia and smoke poisoning induced confusion and terror. The process could last minutes or even hours, turning death into a terrifying, silent, and desperate experience. Why did they use this torture? The Mongols employed it to eliminate enemies discreetly, without spilling blood or creating public commotion. It was ideal for valuable prisoners or important figures they wanted to eliminate without scandal or visible dishonor. Additionally, the mystery and silence surrounding this practice increased the fear and the legend associated with the Mongol Empire. The physical and psychological terror. This punishment combined intense physical suffering with devastating mental torment. The sensation of slow suffocation and impossibility of escape created a state of absolute despair, where the mind was trapped within a body that was slowly dying. Could you endure this torture? Let me know your opinion in the comments. Do you think dying from smoke suffocation is worse than a quick death? Do you believe that silent terror can be more effective than visible violence? Vertical impalement, the most atrocious and horrifying torture of the Mongol Empire. Imagine being trapped, unable to move, while a sharp stake slowly pierces your body from bottom to top, penetrating skin, muscles, and vital organs. This was one of the most horrific and merciless tortures used by the Mongol Empire. Vertical impalement, a punishment designed to cause maximum suffering before the inevitable death. How was this torture carried out? The prisoner would be tied or restrained on the ground or against a post, and the executioners would place a sharpened stake at the base of the body, generally in the anal or genital area. Then, with force and precision, they would begin to slowly impale the condemned, making the stake travel upwards through the body, damaging vital organs and tissues, as the victim experienced indescribable pain. This process could last for hours, prolonging agony and terror before death finally arrived. A brutal method to instill terror and punish. Vertical impalement was not just a method of execution, but also a tool of mass terror. The Mongols used this practice to punish dangerous enemies, traitors, or rebels, later displaying their bodies as a warning to those who dared challenge their power. The prolonged pain and the public spectacle created a profound fear among conquered populations, solidifying Mongol dominance through terror. The physical and psychological suffering. Beyond the unbearable pain, vertical impalement involved devastating psychological torment. The victim remained conscious during most of the process, feeling every second the stakes advance through their body and the slow destruction of their life. Hopelessness, fear, and agony combined in a punishment that went beyond the physical to become total torture. Can you imagine a worse torture than this? Let me know your opinion in the comments. How do you think someone could mentally survive such an experience? Do you think these kinds of punishments were necessary to maintain power, or were they simply acts of pure cruelty? The ice torment, the coldest and most excruciating torture of the Mongol Empire. Imagine being completely naked, your vulnerable body exposed to sub-zero temperatures, as ice begins to form on your skin, and the freezing sensation slowly tears through every fiber of your being. There is no fire to warm you, no shelter to protect you, only the certainty of a slow, painful, and frozen death. This was one of the cruelest and least known punishments that the Mongol Empire inflicted upon its enemies. the torment of ice, a form of torture designed to break both the body and mind of anyone who dared to challenge the power of one of the most feared empires in history. How was this torture carried out? The condemned would be stripped of all clothing and chained to wooden posts or left on frozen surfaces in extremely cold regions of the Mongolian steppes. Sometimes, water was even poured over the body, accelerating the formation of an ice layer on the skin, sealing their fate to an unbearable agony. The cold penetrated to the bones, first numbing the muscles, then causing severe cramps, frostbite lacerations, and ultimately tissue necrosis. The victim could remain for hours or even days in a state of semi-consciousness while their body deteriorated slowly and relentlessly, a silent but devastating punishment. Unlike other bloody and noisy methods, the torment of ice was silent, almost invisible, yet equally or even more cruel. The prisoner's mind would slowly break as the cold first stole away their sensation, then their mobility, and finally their life. There was no need for armed executioners or sharp instruments. Nature itself, with its icy embrace, carried out the sentence. Why did the Mongols resort to this torture? The Mongols knew and mastered the extreme climates of their territories. Using cold as a weapon was not only practical, but also a way to demonstrate their supremacy over their enemies and even over nature itself. Additionally, this punishment was especially feared by invaders and prisoners from warmer regions, for whom exposure to ice was an inhuman and incomprehensible ordeal. Thus, the torment of ice became a powerful psychological tool. Anyone who heard tales of this torture thought twice before confronting the Mongols. The physical and mental suffering. Extreme cold not only destroys the body, but also the mind. The victim would suffer hallucinations, delirium, and panic attacks as their body temperature dropped irreversibly. Every second became an eternity, a futile struggle against an invisible but lethal force. Hypothermia would slowly shut down vital functions until life faded away with a whisper, leaving behind a rigid, frozen, and broken body. Do you think this torture is worse than the more violent ones? Let me know your opinion in the comments. What's worse, dying slowly by freezing or facing a quick but brutal death? Do you think using the environment as a method of execution reflects greater cruelty or military cunning? Don't leave yet, because at the end of this video we will reveal the most forbidden and terrifying torture of the Mongol Empire, one that has been hidden for centuries. Flaying alive, the most horrifying and excruciating torture of the Mongol Empire. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not for faint of heart. Imagine being tied up completely immobile while expert hands slowly begin to peel your skin away, inch by inch, while you are still fully conscious. Every nerve in your body screams in agony. Every part of you begs for mercy, but death refuses to come quickly. This was one of the most atrocious and demonic torments inflicted by the Mongols. Flaying alive. It wasn't just a method of execution, but a public spectacle, a living and then dead, warning of what happened to those who dare to betray or challenge the relentless authority of the Mongol Empire. How was this act of brutality carried out? The executioners would start by making shallow incisions in the victim's skin, usually on the arms, legs, or back. Then, using sharp knives, they would pull the skin away, detaching it from the underlying muscles and tissues. The victim remained alive for most of the process, suffering indescribable pain while watching and feeling their own skin being peeled off, leaving flesh exposed to the air, to the flies, and to the horror of those witnessing the macabre scene. In some cases, only part of the body was flayed, leaving the prisoner agonizing for hours or even days as a warning to others. In the most extreme cases, the flaying was complete, ensuring a slow, humiliating, and excruciating death, a method of punishment and psychological terror. Flaying alive was much more than just an execution. It was a tool of psychological control. The Mongols knew that fear was more powerful than brute force, and this punishment instilled profound terror in conquered populations. No one wanted to imagine themselves in the skin, or rather, without the skin, of those subjected to this ordeal. Every scream, every drop of blood, every piece of exposed flesh was a silent warning. Disobedience meant suffering the worst fate imaginable, absolute horror in body and soul. This punishment destroyed not only the body, but also the mind. The victim not only endured the most intense physical pain, but also absolute despair as they watched their own integrity disintegrate before their eyes. Death did not come swiftly. It crept in slowly, like an invisible executioner, as the body collapsed from shock, blood loss, and infection. Can you imagine anything more terrifying? Let me know your opinion in the comments. Do you think flaying alive is the most inhuman torture ever created? Do you believe these kinds of punishments were necessary to maintain order, or were they simply acts of senseless cruelty? But don't leave yet, because if you think this was the most horrifying thing the Mongol Empire could do, you're wrong. What's coming next is even worse. A torture so brutal, so secret, that was erased from many historical records. Get ready, because up next is the darkest and most forbidden punishment of all, the torment of boiling heat. The most atrocious and forbidden torture of the Mongol Empire. We've reached the end, but also the darkest and most chilling moment of this journey through the secret tortures of the Mongol Empire. Because if you thought you'd already heard the worst, let me warn you, this surpasses every limit of pain, horror, and brutality. The torment of boiling heat was one of the most ruthless executions, designed to destroy the body and spirit in the most agonizing way possible, so much so that many historians claim this practice was deliberately silenced, hidden in the records, due to its inhuman nature. How was this horrifying punishment carried out? The procedure was simple in concept, but infernal in execution. Mongol executioners would boil large quantities of water, oil, or even molten lead. The prisoner, immobilized, was first forced to inhale the scalding steam, which seared their respiratory tract, causing internal burns and suffocation. Then, slowly, the burning liquid was poured over parts of the body, sometimes over the limbs, other times directly onto the torso or head. The scalding liquid would instantly destroy the skin, liquefy subcutaneous fat, and cause such excruciating pain that many prisoners lost consciousness, although some unfortunate ones managed to remain conscious through much of the ordeal. In the most extreme cases, the Mongols would immerse parts of the body into cauldrons of boiling oil, or even throw the entire victim into these scorching vats, condemning them to an atrocious, rapid, and brutal death. Why was this torture considered forbidden? Unlike other Mongol tortures, which served to display power and instill public terror, the torment of boiling heat was used in very specific cases: high-level betrayals, exemplary punishments within the army, or against enemies deemed worthy of a special death. The grotesque nature of this punishment was so inhumane that many chroniclers avoided describing it in detail, while others only alluded to it, as if even writing about it was a way of violating the boundary of what is imaginable. That is why it is said that it was forbidden to recount it in many official records, and survived only in fragmented accounts, passed down in whispers or marginal texts. The ultimate pain and the final silence. This torment destroyed the flesh, but also burned away the very essence of the person. There was no way to endure it, no hope of survival. Only the agonizing scream remained, muffled by the steam, followed by an absolute silence when the body could take no more. The marks left by these executions, when the bodies weren't completely incinerated, stood as testimony to an indescribable pain, and as a warning to those who dare to challenge the Mongol Empire. What do you think? In your opinion, is this the worst torture we've analyzed in this video? Do you believe there were even more atrocious torments that were never told? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And so, we conclude this journey into the darkest side of history. If this content impacted you as much as it did me while creating it, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more chilling stories about the most macabre tactics, punishments, and customs in military history. Turn on the notification bell so YouTube alerts you every time we upload a new episode. And remember, history is full of dark secrets, and here at Dark Medieval Tales, we uncover them one by one. See you in the next video, if you dare.